So, you may remember Francis Crick and James Watson. Who remembers what they did? They discovered the structure of the DNA molecule. Things were known about pieces of it, but they came up with the structure, the double helix, that had different components that combined and attached one side to the other, sort of like a spiral staircase. And that was a major discovery. But we didn't have the ability to look through electron microscopes. And although Lowenhoek, I think, was the one who invented the microscope, and we began to be able to look at things, and we see all this life. I think of it kind of like, we have the whole universe and the stars and what's beyond the Earth and all of that, and then at this much smaller level, it's almost the same. So many different kinds of particles and cells, and to me it's really miraculous that all of this combines to make us and other life forms. So before that, Darwin had an idea about how we evolved, and he based all his ideas on things you could measure, like the shapes and sizes and behaviors of animals and plants, and how they changed over time. They adapted to different circumstances, but that is only the beginning of the story. It isn't really most of our heredity and what is heritable that we carry within us didn't happen that way, doesn't happen that way. A lot of the early life forms were like fungi and bacteria, and some of the components that are in cells and part of DNA and RNA started as bacteria that got sucked into our cells and then got jobs, like being ribosomes and mitochondria. And the ribosomes have the job of getting the information from the DNA and then translating it into living organisms. And a lot of study went on with a slew of scientists who contributed. One was Carl Weiss, who was very instrumental in studying for his whole life. He wanted to understand, how did this genetic code work, and how did the information from the DNA get translated into the rest of the life in the cell. So one of the analogies I read was, there are different kinds of RNA. We've heard about messenger RNA because of vaccines recently. So messenger RNA will take information from DNA, and then it will provide that information to these things called ribosomes that make proteins with and connect amino acids, and all of this means that's how we stay alive and how things change. One of the things that there were several things I thought about as I was reading about this stuff, not just the science part. Have you ever known a situation where something that you thought you knew and knew really well was suddenly found to be incorrect, or new information appeared that told you that what you learned, it just isn't that way? Anybody have a situation like that? And how did it feel to you when something that seemed so stable suddenly was up in the air? Anyone want to share what that was like? Like maybe, earthquakes. I mean, we expect them, and it shakes up our world. Yes? It makes you wonder, what is stability and what might be the next thing that really shakes us up and is very different. Yes? I forgot your name, Jeff. Jerome, I'm sorry. Jerome is saying, well, isn't it just the way it is that we learn things and things are known and then they're all models and they're discovered, and then as new information becomes available, some models are thrown out and some persist and things keep being fine-tuned. There are models, there are theories, but then as technology improves, experiments can be done to prove or disprove things. So it was the scientists who had the wildest ideas, some of them, and their colleagues thought they were nuts and wanted to disprove or just didn't believe the findings that they were discovering because it didn't fit with anything that they knew or any research up until that time. And this one guy, Carl Weiss, who worked for many years, found that, was instrumental in the steps to find that there's this thing called lateral or horizontal gene transfer. Our picture of the tree of life, where the parent send messages, the offspring inherit traits from the parents. That was our conception after Darwin. And some people in the early 1920s and all through the 20th century until now began wondering, like, is that really how it works? Is there something else? And it turns out that there are all these different kinds of tiny particles that can get sucked up into a cell of other creatures, other beings, and even sometimes it would be something that would destroy the cell, but oftentimes a bacteria gets sucked in or a piece of genetic material gets sucked in sideways, and it could even be in a different species. And then it becomes a part of that cell and is functioning inside our cells. One of the things we've heard about lately, or in recent years, I think you probably are familiar with, are microbiomes, where we talk about the bacteria in your gut and on your skin, and it's everywhere, around us, on us, in us, but not in ourselves. That's the new thing, that we have inherited a lot of how we function and how our cells function and how life continues and how information from one being to the next gets passed sideways and gets passed down. And to me, it's just amazing and fascinating. And that's the kind of thing that many scientists were like, no way, that can't be happening, until Carl Weiss and others after him devised experiments to show that that was true. And it's exciting to me. I'm a science geek. I like reading and I like learning, and so for some people to think, wow, it's not the way we thought, it's not a tree of life, it's like a web. There are branches, but it's not a vertical tree where things go up and things get passed down. And toward the end of this book I was reading, it's called I Contain Multitudes. I Contain Multitudes. He's talking about all the microbes that live on us, within us, and in our cells, and how they keep us alive. And the way we learned about microbes in the 20th century was that they're germs, they need to be destroyed. And it turns out a lot of them are beneficent and we need them. And so trying to sterilize and clean it all up wasn't the best idea. There are many microbes and bacteria and other little creatures that we need in our bodies and in our cells. So it's kind of mind-blowing to me that this is something very new about how the human body functions and how we are so connected. So, for instance, I have microbes and whatever in my mouth, in my nose, on my hands, in my body, on my body. And when I breathe, you know, my microbes are going out there. When I shake your hand, we're exchanging these microbes all the time. And therefore, we are all part of each other. We are not separate the way you might think. Some of you might have heard about how there is an aspen grove in Utah that it's been determined that it is one organism. The root stock keeps going underground and more trees pop up. And they look like individuals, but they aren't. They are all connected underground. And this one in Utah is like the biggest living organism possibly in the world. It weighs about 10 million pounds, and it's incredible. And there have also been recent studies that show that trees in a forest communicate with each other. Underground, there are fungus, and fungus, that connect them all, and they communicate. So if there's a small tree that's trying to grow up toward the light and needs more nutrition, those fungi will slow down the growth of the trees around it and allow that tree to grow up. There's a cooperation among them. And, we humans, it would be really great if we could sort of function in the same way, that in our communities, in our, connected organisms, that if I need more food, you let me have more food and whatever's in the system. But what I was amazed when I heard about the aspen trees, because when you see an aspen forest, they just look like a bunch of trees. You would never guess that each tree was a clone of the first one. And they just keep moving along. And so I think that the other thing that I read is that when we think about all the microbes around us, you know that in a hospital, there are diseases, viruses or bacteria or whatever that can pass through the hospital, and people get them because inside that hospital, in that sterile environment, those viruses and those bacteria have, they're going all through that hospital, and people have them on their clothes, on their hands, on their faces, in their mouths, and they're engaging within that whole community within the hospital. So you hear about the MRSA and other things that happen in hospitals. But one of the things this author was talking about was, well, what if we brought in some of the beneficial environmental microbes and bacteria into the hospital to kind of dilute the negative stuff and let some of the bad stuff get out. So way back when Florence Nightingale was treating soldiers, when someone had an infection, and she would say, open the window. And when she would open the window, people got better because it improved the overall environment of microbes. And it's just, she knew instinctively. There was no evidence. But I was reading a study about someone in a hospital, and they unlocked the window, like they're all sealed like Fort Knox, and opened windows, and it really helped. It really helped. Not as many people were sick, or they got better faster, or they just got better. And so we need each other, and all of these things that are moving around on us, between us, we're all one big organism, really. And metaphorically and psychologically and spiritually, I think that's so important, that we are all really connected. And we all come from the same start of life on earth a long time ago. So I see most of you are sleeping. Just, you have a question? You mean a lot? You're saying that you've heard that in the past, long ago, that we were just like 1,250 Homo sapiens. Do you know that some of our genome has like a percent of Neanderthal? Do you know? And chimpanzees. And we have chimpanzee genes in our genome. Did you know that? He said he has children, he knows. Mark? Yes. Mark was saying that not only are we all related to each other as humans, we're related to plants and other animals, and this horizontal gene transfer can happen from species to species. Like from pigs, we got swine flu, and then some of that genetic material enters into us and becomes part of our genome. And what the pig was carrying also has other bits of genetics from other animals. And plants are like that. And that as certain species begin to diminish or go extinct, we're losing a part of ourselves, because we are all made of all of these things. And nobody is separate. Nobody is really just an individual, and I only have my genes, and that's it. So it's a good point. I'll get back to you. Yes? That's a good point. Tell me your name again. Taylor was saying was that I read about it when Darwin was doing his work. He had a contemporary who didn't like the idea of survival of the fittest. And he was thinking more about a kind of symbiotic way of creatures living with each other, and that we're connected to plants and animals and which eats what and how they grow and what they all of these things connect by different genetic material that gets passed around. And a lot of it becomes essential for the functioning of the plant and the animal that ate it or things like that. And that we could be moving toward, and that's what this guy, Ed Young, who got a Pulitzer Prize for this book, I Contain Multitudes, is talking about. If we understand how a certain microbiome is beneficial, let's say, I mean, we could talk about, the first thing I heard about was like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. And we know what's missing in the gut of a person who has that. The first time people heard about it was like, oh my God, that's so disgusting. But if we could transplant into the gut of the person who has Crohn's a microbiome that is healthy, then that person would have great relief and it would help. And we could create all kinds of environments with beneficial microbiomes that would help all of life succeed and flourish, and it would be great to be able to do that. And more of it is being studied, and but that's what Ed Young was talking about in terms of where we might, how could this be beneficial? And like what Taylor was saying, how we could develop a symbiosis among all beings and fix things when we understand what went wrong in the microbiota of whatever disease or even how to fix, houses and other kinds of things in our environment. If we are able to manipulate the microbes and the microbiomes, we could live in a much healthier and productive world. Did you have a question? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Jerome is asking a question about from a cultural point of view. We are people who live in cultures that have certain values and beliefs. And so as this information is discovered and tested out, there's always resistance in the beginning, and there are always going to be people who don't want to adapt to or can't, have trouble with that, to new information and to new, like, transplanting microbiomes to treat certain kinds of diseases. Right, he's talking about genetically modified. I have a different opinion about that. I believe that some of the genetically modified foods, they're not dangerous to us. It's so that someone like a big company can get a patent on those seeds and push out smaller farms and growers. That's my idea about genetically modified foods. But yeah, and things are discovered along the way, like you might be looking for this and you find that instead, and it was like, wow, I wasn't looking for that, but there it is. But the people who were these like fearless scientists who didn't care what their peers were thinking about them or just kind of pushed them away and kept pursuing in a driven way what they were finding, I think we owe lots of thanks to them, that they were so, curious and asking questions, and sometimes they got it wrong and sometimes they got it right, but it's like we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And so all these different generations of scientists who've been looking into this kind of thing and how we are so connected through the microbes all around us, that it's very promising. And not to have unity, but to have maybe a unified kind of looking forward and working toward a world where we can all flourish and we can all eat and we can support people who are in developing countries. Or there are just so many possibilities. And yeah, there's cultural pushback, and some people who might be benefiting from the way things are don't really want to pursue things that might be helpful for everyone, but you kind of ask, well, how are they benefiting from this, and what's the threat? Anybody else? Oh, sorry, Pat.
Kind of interesting. We're unique, I think, in the history of the planet, in that we have the ability to really change the environment through our actions. And I remember a lecture from a geologist who went that the planet has gone through these cycles. It's very high carbon dioxide, asteroids hitting, got rid of the dinosaurs, something else got rid of whatever preceded the dinosaurs. But they were not in control. But those events were out of the control of the creatures at the time. The dinosaurs couldn't do anything about the asteroid or whatever could come before it. So now we're in a mode where we have the ability to destroy the planet or not. And it seems to me that we're losing the big picture in the sense that for momentary advantages, we're destroying the planet with our climate change. And at some point, just like it happened when volcanoes changed the atmosphere, it's going to become impossible to reverse. As the seas get warmer, coastal places will be flooded.
Your name is?
David.
David. David's bringing up
A very philosophical.
a philosophical point that I'm sure a lot of us have thought about, is that at this point in our time on Earth, we as human beings have the ability to change our environment for the good or for the bad. And that is a precarious position to be in. And everything we do affects other things. And so I don't want to get into too much of a political discussion about this, but the fate of the earth is in our hands. And I think that it's so overwhelming for people to think about this huge thing that it feels like we're helpless, there's nothing we can do. Uh, what could I possibly do that would be helpful? But I think there are really small steps that we can take. And it doesn't have to be a big deal. But if everybody was taking small steps, and look at what Greta Thunberg did. She's a child when she started protesting. And it caught on, and I don't mean we should all be out on the streets protesting, but there are small things we can all do. We can compost, or we can talk to our friends, or we can join an environmental group, or we can, I do some political stuff. I write postcards because that's what I can handle. But there is something all of us can do to improve our lives and the lives of people around us. Pat, did you want to say something? That's an interesting question. Although it's not science fiction, it's how we've been evolving. Pat was asking, if some microbiomes enter us and ours enter others, aren't we all going to be just one conglomerate? And in a way, that's true. Did you want to answer that? Taylor was saying, there's a sort of, there could be a way where, everything is like one step away from, destroying the planet, the end of time. But actually, that reminds me of something that I'm going to end with this. I don't know where the text comes from, but we should imagine ourselves as there are equal good deeds and bad deeds in the world at this moment. And the next thing that we do is going to tip it one way or another. And if you go for the good, then that leads things toward the good. But if you go for the bad, it's a slippery slope. And I like to think of things that way. So there are things we can do, even just being kind to people, noticing them, asking how they're doing if they look like they're not doing well. And this is how I think we can all, those are things we can do. And there are lots of little things that we can do. So I think there is hope, and there are lots of ways that we can help each other, and we are kind of all one big organism from the beginning of time when multicellular life began to evolve. So it is kind of like you were saying, Pat. We may be one big organism, but there are what seem like individuals, but we're all sharing the same genetic material, and still, some of it's sliding back and forth. Thank you all for listening to this maybe boring talk, but I'm really glad we talked about all this. Thanks a lot. And here comes Mel Aronoff, longtime member and scholar, who will share his thoughts with us. Thank you, Mel. Oh yeah, I'm gonna
Does this one work too? It does?
It does,
Okay.
but it doesn't go very far. It's caught under the
I'm going to ask for everybody to move up, because this is going to be a discussion, not a talking at you. The more people closer to me, the better. Rabbis included. While we're getting ready, I just want to make a little kind of a joke on what Barbara said. When she said she wasn't there when the Lucky Cells happened, I was there.
No, you were.
Actually, it's a little bit of a joke, but it's really true. 500 million years ago was the Cambrian explosion. Not extinction, permanent extinction. The Cambrian explosion. And you can go to British Columbia today, and you can find the fossils from there was the tropical sea up where mountains with snow now. It was tropical sea, and they have the most amazing fossils of really strange aquatic creatures. And that explosion happened. There were multi-celled animals long before that, but they were not in the numbers and not in the profusion of today. And so, does this one work? Okay, I got to bend my hand down. Unless somebody knows how to move it back up. But no, so this is not part of what I was going to talk about, but just we went on an amazing hike about 11 years ago, and in the most gorgeous areas that's like comparable to Yosemite, with mountains and waterfalls and lakes and rivers, on a nature thing about the Cambrian explosion. And you go up to the fossils that are there, and fossils that you sit in the middle of them, and you can take a piece of paper and a pencil, and you can make the outline of it. So it's basically the multicellular explosion that came to us, by and large, was from that time period, about 500 million years ago. So we pretty rapidly got here. 500 million years in the length of the universe is pretty quick. So I will. Okay, so I don't know if everything's been distributed to whoever wants to do it, but I really want to talk to people about what they are interested in. I want to just start off with, whenever